If you're serious about understanding how ordinary families survived extraordinary times, this episode matters. During the Second World War, ration books didn't magically solve hunger. Governments encouraged victory gardens, yes, but what rarely gets discussed are the hidden food sources families cultivated quietly in overlooked spaces. These weren't decorative gardens, they were insurance policies against uncertainty. Some were technically against regulations. Others were simply creative uses of space most people ignored. Before we get into the details, make sure you subscribe to the Prepper Historian and share this with someone who takes resilience seriously. These lessons are too valuable to stay buried. Let's move straight into what most documentaries skip. Suburban lawns were quietly converted into calorie-producing root plots. While propaganda posters showcased neat backyard gardens, many families went further. Lawns, once symbols of status, were stripped and planted with calorie-dense crops like potatoes, turnips and rutabagas. Root vegetables were chosen deliberately because they grew underground, were less visible from the street, and stored well through winter. In Britain and parts of the United States, households layered straw over potato mounds to disguise cultivation. Today, the lesson is simple. Prioritize crops that maximize calories per square foot and store without refrigeration. If you're planning resilience gardening, think potatoes first, aesthetics second. Railway embankments and unused industrial edges became guerrilla growing zones. Urban families lacking private land exploited marginal spaces. Railway lines, factory perimeters and canal edges often had strips of neglected soil. Workers planted beans, cabbages and hardy greens in these overlooked corridors. It wasn't always legal, but enforcement was inconsistent during wartime strain. The takeaway isn't trespassing, it's recognizing microclimates. Even today, unused corners of property, fence lines, drainage edges, shed perimeters can produce meaningful yields if soil is amended properly. Hidden edges are productive edges. Window boxes and rooftop corners supplied critical vitamins. Vitamin deficiencies were a genuine wartime concern. Citrus imports were disrupted and fresh produce was scarce. Families turned to window boxes for parsley, chives, spinach and small carrots. Rooftops hosted shallow soil beds for lettuce and onions. These weren't large yields, but they prevented scurvy and supported immune health. The modern application is container gardening. Even in apartments, nutrient-dense greens can be rotated in small trays. Focus on fast-growing crops with repeat harvest cycles. Rabbit hutches were, often concealed behind sheds and inside basements. Small livestock really did make the difference between protein sufficiency and, chronic hunger. Rabbits were ideal, quiet, fast-breeding and efficient converters of scraps into meat. In occupied Europe, especially, families built hutches behind woodpiles or inside outbuildings to avoid confiscation. Rabbit manure also enriched soil. For preparedness-minded individuals today, small livestock regulations vary. But where legal, rabbits remain one of the most efficient protein systems per square metre. The historical lesson is diversification. Calories from both plant and animal sources. Hidden berry hedgerows, replaced ornamental shrubs. Instead of purely decorative hedges, some families planted currants, gooseberries and blackberries along property lines. These plants looked like standard hedging, but yielded vitamin-rich fruit seasonally. Berries were preserved as jams, syrups, or dried concentrates. The practical insight here is perennial food landscaping. Replace non-productive shrubs with edible hedges. They require similar maintenance, yet provide recurring harvests year after year. Mushroom cultivation, interestingly enough, thrived in cellars and bomb shelters. Mushrooms require darkness and humidity, conditions common in basements and air raid shelters. In Britain, instructional pamphlets circulated on growing mushrooms in composted manure beds indoors. The yields were modest but reliable. Today, mushroom cultivation kits replicate this method easily, and small-scale setups can be established in garages or storage rooms. This is food production independent of sunlight, an overlooked resilience layer. Beekeeping was quietly maintained in back gardens and rooftops. Sugar rationing made honey valuable beyond flavour. Honey replaced refined sugar in baking and preserved fruit. Urban beekeeping expanded significantly during the war, often discreetly maintained on rooftops or in enclosed yards. Beyond honey, beeswax served practical uses. The modern preparedness application is clear. Pollinators multiply productivity while producing shelf-stable sweetness. Even one hive significantly increases garden yields. Chickens were kept in modified coal sheds and garages. In cities where regulations restricted livestock, families improvised. Coal sheds became chicken coops, garages were partitioned. Chickens provided eggs consistently, often more valuable than meat due to repeat output. Feed was supplemented with kitchen scraps and foraged greens. Today, urban chicken keeping is resurgent, but even without birds, the principle applies. Focus on repeat yield food systems. Eggs were wartime gold because they renewed daily. Aquatic plants and fish were raised in ornamental ponds. Some households converted decorative ponds into functional protein sources. Carp and other hardy fish were raised discreetly. Watercress was cultivated in shallow flowing water systems, offering a nutrient-dense green. While not widespread, these adaptations existed where space allowed. In modern settings, small aquaponic systems replicate this synergy. Fish waste fertilizes plants, plants filter water. It's an old principle refined by modern engineering. Perhaps the most overlooked hidden food source wasn't cultivated at all. Families mapped local hedgerows, forests and fields for nettles, dandelion greens, chestnuts and wild herbs. Knowledge was passed discreetly. Foraging supplemented rationed diets significantly, especially in rural areas. The modern application requires education and caution, but the principle stands. Food security includes knowledge of local ecosystems. Identify 3 edible wild plants in your region and learn them thoroughly. Knowledge weighs nothing but feeds generations. Why these hidden systems mattered more than official rations. Ration systems aimed for fairness, not abundance. Hidden food production provided nutritional depth and psychological security. Families who diversified, roots underground, greens above, protein in hutches, sweetness from hives, weathered shortages with more stability. It wasn't luck. It was layered planning in limited space. For serious historians and preparedness enthusiasts, the lesson isn't nostalgia. It's structural resilience. Small, concealed, diversified food systems protect households during instability. World War II families didn't wait for perfect conditions. They used edges, shadows, rooftops, basements, and forgotten corners. They chose calorie density, nutrient value, and renewability over aesthetics. If this kind of deep historical resilience study is what you're here for, subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this episode with someone who believes history should be practical. The past still has instructions for those willing to study it carefully.